And our vision of a learner really, it was important that it went from, we use the term from classroom to boardroom, that we weren't just creating this vision of a learner we weren't seeing impact in the classroom. So I'm really
Well,
proud of
and
what we developed and the priorities that came out of that in terms of engaging all of our stakeholders. And that is that we're inspiring thinking, cultivating well-being, and building relationships. And that's the core of what we do.
so up until about, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, I didn't think much about Yellowknife. It's, of course, in the northern part of Canada and never been there. And, it is a little bit, it's very isolated. And now I'm, pretty obsessed with it. I've been reading a lot about it and having interviewed Jamil Aziz, who is the superintendent in Yellowknife School District. And then through a series of events connected to Simone Gessler, who is my guest today, who is the superintendent of Yellowknife Catholic. I've come to appreciate just kind of the awesomeness of that place, both as an interesting place to visit, but more importantly, in this context, the way in which education is being offered to those communities through really great leadership. And Simone just impressed me so much with the way in which she's worked with their stakeholders to create what I think is one of the very best. And she doesn't like using the word strategic plan because there's some challenges with that concept, but priorities, if you will, for their school district, just simple, clear, and aspirational visions that they have for their learners. And the way that they've communicated that and shared with that, I think is outstanding. And so I had an opportunity to speak with Simone about that and some of the other aspects of living in the North is a fascinating topic, I think. And she's a super engaging person and personality. I just enjoyed my conversation. I know you will too. So I've listened to this episode with Simone Gessler. Hey, Simone, first question I want to ask you. What are you reading?
I am reading Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Shameen. It really looks at sort of that mental fitness and what are our judges and our saboteurs. I'm actually reading it for the second time
Okay.
because it's something that I continue to go back to. It's really about creating high-performing teams and digging down into true potential. So I really like the premise behind it. Comes with an app and some mental fitness exercises you can do. So I'm just kind of coming back to it now.
Well, anytime you have a book that you are rereading, it's either because it didn't take the first time, or it's so good that
That's
it
right.
needs multiple reads. So I'm going to
Yeah.
assume it's probably the latter. So that's awesome. That's awesome. How about anything? What are you watching that's just kind of for fun? I always think people in your position, you have to be smart all the time. Is there anything that you can watch that kind of, maybe is not so smart, but it's just a kind of an escape to get away? Because I'm always curious.
Yeah. I watch Ink Masters, and
Okay.
the most recent version of that is called Angels. And so they travel around the states to the large cities and they try and find the best tattoo artist in the city. And it's a competition. And then in the end, they have to compete against one of the 3 or 4 angels to win a spot on the next season of Ink Master. So yeah, that's one of the things I watch when I just don't want to think. The
Yeah. Well,
art
and
is
I'm always,
amazing. Yeah. Sorry.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. No, no. And I think about all of those the genre of that, which is anything from cooking to sewing. My wife's loves the ones where they make dresses and all kind. I mean, it's
Right.
just, I find it just amazing that genre, you can just plug in any kind of artisan or idea in there, and people just like watching other people make and create. That's awesome too. It's a little bit of inspiration, but a little bit of escapism for sure.
Yeah.
With that, right?
And my other guilty pleasure is Coronation Street. I'm a huge Corey fan, so I wa
Okay,
and it's so good right now. I can't wait to get home to watch it at the end of the day every day.
okay, I'm flabbergasted because I don't know if you know this, but your colleague from, I don't know how far away Jamil is from you right now. He is also a huge Coronation Street fan.
Is he?
Yes, and I've never met anybody. And for those of you watching this who are not Canadian, I don't even know how to describe Coronation Plate. It's like the oldest soap opera from England that
Yeah.
exists. Like it's been what, 60 years or
Yeah.
70 years or
Something like
something
that. The longest
insane.
running.
I
Sure.
remember growing up when you only had three channels, and
Mhm.
sometimes like it was the only thing on, and I thought like, who's even watching this? But so how far do you go back to Coronation Street?
Oh, probably about 20 years. And my mom
Okay.
was a Coronation Street watcher, and I was like, as a kid, this is so ridiculous. Why do you watch this? Thinking, right? And she just loved it. And then somewhere along the way, I kind of watched with her occasionally, and it just, yeah, it clicked. So now probably 20 years or longer. I,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
I did not know Jameel was a Corey fan, so I'm going to have to ask him about that. It's
You're gonna
almost
have to.
literally across the street.
Well, there you go. Well, there's something to talk about your next
Yeah.
time you guys get together. That's well. And so, listen. In 3 minutes or so, what is life like in northern Canada, and why did you, because you didn't grow up here, decide that this is home for you?
Hmm. Well, I decided it was home because I came up for work and I came for a
Yeah.
couple of years, which is the story of many of us that have come and stayed. And I just really kind of fell in love with the community, the people. It's like there's many people that aren't from here. So you build your own Yellowknife family. And then the summers are spectacular. And I actually
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize how wonderful they were until COVID. And it's one of the things I think was a plus for me out of COVID is because we couldn't leave the north. So I truly had to stay here through the whole summer and realized how
Right.
wonderful it was. Because as an educator, I usually left in the summer on summer break, went home, did my traveling. And the North is just so unique. It's it's very eclectic in terms of the people that are here. There's lots to do, winter and summer, and it's
Yeah.
just a really strong community feel. And then, of course, my role with Yellowknife Catholic Schools, I just really loved working
Sure.
with the board and moved my kind of way through it and met my husband here, had my kids here, so
Okay.
that's what kept me here.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I'm curious about as I'm learning more about it, and as you described, it seems like I don't know what the time frame is, but after 2 years or 3 years, people kind of have to make that choice, right? Is this for me or not? And when you think about those who have, like yourself, chosen, and you talk about work and maybe meeting your spouse as part of that decision, but
Mhm.
like, what are the other things that you would say are the determining factors for people who say, "Yep, this is for me"? Like
Mhm.
what is it like? Can you pinpoint, and not just your experience, but from others who like you have made that choice to say, this is where I want to be?
Mhm. I think it's probably the opportunities that were afforded in the North in some ways and the activities. Like I said, summer, winter, fall, there's lots of, if you're an outdoors person. And I think that's really who those who choose to stay here, it really has a lot to do
Right.
with the outdoors. And some of
Yeah.
that is unique experiences as well, like our golf course. Our golf course there's no grass. It's all sand, indoor, outdoor carpet for the greens. You carry a little mat around, but that's what we have. And
Yeah.
we have a strong golf membership because that's what we have, and it's a place to be social. And I really think
Yeah.
it is the activities that are here as well as the opportunities that are afforded career wise, the
Hmm.
work that's here. I think that living in the North is becoming a little more difficult in terms of cost of living. The cost of living has
Yeah.
really risen. And maybe the wages
Which
and
is true everywhere, though, too,
it's
though,
true
right? I
everywhere.
mean, so
Yeah.
so that may not
Used to
bother
be a
people
little
at some
more
point, yeah.
lucrative to work in the North
Okay.
in terms of pay. And I
Right.
think it still is. It's just that it used to be like this and it's coming like this and hopefully not this way,
Right.
right? So
Yeah. And the other thing about the golf is you can make a tee time at 10:30 at night if you want
it's
to,
true. We
right?
have
In
the
June.
we have the midnight golf tournaments. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very cool. So let's get into, what's happening in Yellowknife Catholic. What are you most proud of about your district and the work you've done? Because you've been there for years now. So when you look
Mhm.
back, and what are you proud of?
Mhm. Really proud of how we've stayed kind of cutting edge forward thinking and forward moving. We've moved forward with, change that is constantly happening in education, but really in terms of moving forward with technology and moving forward with how we look at um, assessment, moving forward with how we are ensuring that kids in the North, or our students here in the North, have the same education that their Southern counterparts would have. And in some ways, as good or better than what is being offered in other areas. And by that, I just mean in terms of opportunity.
Right.
I'm most proud right now, Dean, of the work that we've been doing around our vision of a learner, our strategic plan. And we're not even using
Yes.
the term strategic plan anymore because it kind of holds that feeling of something that leaves a sour taste in your mouth. So we've
Yeah.
moved more to a vision of a learner, and we were able to develop that through COVID, which was a task in itself, but still have a lot of stakeholder engagement and create, create a vision that really is about um, the whole student. And with that, we started looking at what do we mean by data? And data doesn't always have to
Mm-hmm.
be, or shouldn't always be, that quantitative. We're looking at assessing the whole child. So, and our vision of a learner really, it was important that we used the term from classroom to boardroom, that we weren't just creating this vision of a learner we weren't seeing impact in the classroom. So I'm really
Well,
proud of
and
what we developed and the priorities that came out of that in terms of engaging all of our stakeholders. And that is that we're inspiring thinking, cultivating well-being, and building relationships. And that's the core of what we do. And then within that, then we look at what are our reading levels, what are that
sure.
type of data.
Sure. But I just love it. I mean, and I talked about this earlier is what just I was so intrigued with was the language that you
Mm.
chose to have, which to your point takes it away from that typical strategic planning, which gets it gets corporate-ese, it gets education-ese, it gets all of those things that, as you say, to the person and the people that actually have to implement this, classroom teachers, it's removed because that's not how they think and that's
Mhm.
not how they talk. And so I'd love to know more about just even that language. Like the building relationships one in particular, I think fascinates me because what
Mhm.
I see in others that are probably a lot similar ideas is, I mean, even community, which is a better term than what I've even seen others use, but like actually using the phrase building relationships as a priority.
Mhm.
Like, I'd love to
Mhm.
know even about how you get there.
Yeah, so then that's the hard part, right? Because it's easy to say we're going to build relationships. But what do we mean by that? So then we kind of really dug into what would students be doing and demonstrating. We're using sort of that not sort of, we are using that observable impact model. What are students doing and demonstrating? What are educators doing and demonstrating? And what are the activities and assessments that we're using in order to bring that forward? And so then we can really see evidence of building relationship in classrooms. And to just, you talked about that sort of corporate speak. One of the things we said right out of the gates is we don't want any edu speak. We don't want any buzzwords. We
Mm-hmm.
want real terminology that everybody understands what we're talking about. So that was sort of a goal of ours. So
Yeah.
we talk about, sharing the aspects of your identity in multiple ways. That's how you build relationship, by being
Right.
able to say, this is who I am, this is my identity, and be able to share that a multiple different in multiple different ways. So then if that's the case, then educators are, designing, implementing, and modeling activities that allow students to demonstrate that identity. So really digging into what's the actions, and then what are some activities, and it really aligns with some of the work that we're doing around, what is our best self, showing up as our best self. So that's language that our students can use. They understand because we talk about what is best self. So we tie that back to our vision of a learner and what are the characteristics and skills that we want our students to walk away with. So I think the vision of a learner isn't necessarily a new concept, right?
No.
Lots of people have vision of learning or vision of a graduate. But what we wanted to do is really talk about how do we get there and what are those three important things.
Well, and I think that's, as I talk to leaders, there's no shortage of, effort that's being put into these kinds of, visionary documents, whether it's your strategic plan or other sort of levels of that. The challenge of it, of course, is how do you make it real
Mhm.
for those people? So I don't know if you can talk a little bit about how that's been received by teachers and maybe even examples of the sort of the manifestation, the actualization of the strategic plan in
Mm.
some maybe an example or something like that that would help people understand what that actually means for a classroom teacher and what you're seeing in your
Yeah,
schools.
I sure can. So we took our priorities and we put them into something that we're required to do is have growth plans. Every staff member has to have growth plans. And so we changed our growth plans into personal impact plans. So how are you personally impacting your classroom or your students in the work that you do under the three priorities? So we created personal impact plans that every staff member creates, and they choose one of the three priorities to focus on and one of the goals under the priorities. And then throughout the year, they have a check-in, but they really talk about the strategies that they used. They check in and reflect on whether that strategy worked or didn't work, but there's really a focus on one of those three. We have something called collaborative time, Dean, and that's where our staff members are grouped according to either grade level or subject area or departments, depending on, if they're at the high school or the elementary schools. So I'll use grade ones for teachers, for example, or grade one teachers across the district come together one afternoon a month in a collaborative team and they work on their team impact plan, which then again also aligns with those three priorities. And they choose which one of these is probably our biggest challenge right now that we
Mm-hmm.
would like to build some capacity around in our students. So then they build sort of a plan, not a plan. They build an action plan with strategies. They go back into their classroom, they try the strategies, they see what worked, they come back, they talk about it. They do something called a strategy review. And then I can say, you know what, Dean, this worked fantastic. I saw buy-in with the kids, I saw engagement. They were being able to talk about who they are and what is important to them, all of the things that align with our priorities. Or they can say, this didn't work at all. Like, don't bother trying this. It was a
Mm-hmm.
total flop. It was a fail. So it kind of, it's like that. We work with Cale Burke and who has created sort of that observable impact framework. And then there's something like the TripAdvisor review. That's your strategy review where you talk about what worked and didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So that time together, the personal impact plans, and the next step that we've developed this year is our leadership vision of a leader. And so that still falls under the priorities, but as leaders in Yellowknife Catholic schools, what do we want to be doing and demonstrating to support our staff and our students in these three priority areas? So that's where that classroom to boardroom work really works.
Right. You're getting down to what this actually looks like and how people are supposed to take it. Because again, I think, many of us who've been in education for a while have been part of these kinds of plans and they just don't translate, they don't trickle down. So I appreciate the work that you've done with that. This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now back to the show. So you talked a little bit about, just even in that last part, about like the TripAdvisor review or people sharing what works and didn't. So I want to put you on the spot as a leader. I'd love to hear a story of a leadership challenge that you faced or are facing.
I think there's lots, and I think every day is a learning
Yeah.
experience. A leadership challenge, right now is really motivating and encouraging people to go into leadership. And for, a number of different reasons, it's just that the demands on time, the emotional toll, people see the emotional toll it's taking on their or having on their, administrators, the stress of meeting the needs of everybody that, they're focusing on supporting, from students to teachers to parents to, the district office, the ministry. There's a lot that our leaders are So really trying to build that leadership development. And I think part of and creating some capacity around that to highlight the positives of
Yeah.
leadership, because there's also some strengths in being a leader and some positives, and trying to create. And I feel like just despite all of the things that we try to do and some of the things that I've tried to put forward in terms of encouragement, just can't, I don't know, just can't get people to buy into why strong leadership in education is important. They understand that, but all of the things that come with it are deterring them from
Well,
even stepping forward and thinking about it.
yeah. And I wrote an article probably about a year ago called "Who Would Want to Be a Leader?" to
Okay.
specifically address what you're sharing. And it's not just education. I think we can see it in political life. We can see it in all kinds
Sure.
of organizations, that leadership is just not, for many people, not as appealing as it was. And I think about, even just the way you're describing, your priorities and so forth is, I think sometimes it just comes down to being more attentive to,
Mm.
how do I demonstrate that I really like this work, even though it's hard, right? And so, because sometimes you look at somebody and I don't know, do they like their job? So maybe it's about being a little bit more intentional
Yeah.
about how do we make our things visible, and it's not about, I think we can all fall into the trap of like a toxic positivity where
Sure.
we're just always saying everything's great when no,
Yeah.
that's not always great.
Yeah.
But I think there's part of the joy is embracing the dissonances and embracing the challenges. Like, this is hard, but like I'm having fun trying to figure out the hard stuff
Sure.
too, right?
Sure.
So I mean, it's not easy, and I think as somebody who's probably thinking about who's gonna someday step into your position, you want to leave a place where people say, "Oh, I want to keep doing what Simone's doing because it's something
Mm.
that looks like
Mhm.
she's having a great time." And it's the same with principals or whatever. So, yeah, that's a challenge that I don't think you are alone in facing. I
Right.
think from what I know, like, that is everybody's thinking about that. And it's interesting because I don't know that 5 years ago we would have had this conversation.
I agree.
So,
We
so
had.
I mean, is it like, and so that makes it, the obvious answer is COVID.
Mm.
But maybe do you think there's something else too around what's making leadership more difficult and challenging today?
Yeah, I think the demands are higher. The demands are stronger. I think the needs in education have grown. I think what we're expecting out of our education system as a whole in terms of, and I do agree with you, Dean, that it's coming out of COVID. We're seeing a heightened response to all of those things that we had to do before.
Mm-hmm.
So I I I think there isn't enough resources. And by that I'm not talking about money necessarily. We always say there's not enough money. That's not what I'm saying. There's enough resources. We need more mental health workers. There aren't any across Canada.
Yeah,
That's not an education issue or a northern issue.
that's right.
Even if we have the funding for it, we can't get them. We need more speech language. We need more resources, and they're not there. And so that's falling on us to try and fill the gaps.
Hmm.
And it's falling on our leaders to fill the gaps. Whereas years ago, we didn't have as much funding, but there was more access to those resources. Or maybe it's the cycle of there wasn't as much need for those resources. I don't know. That's the question,
Yeah,
right? But I feel
yeah.
like that's
It
where we're at.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a compounding of probably a number of things that leads, never
Mhm.
just one thing, but I think you've identified a lot of different things. And so each one of those probably requires its own deep dive into, like, how do we get, and you're not solving, nothing gets fixed in terms of, oh, that we don't have that
Right.
problem anymore, but how do we just, even making things a little bit better, a little bit better, and a little bit better is
Mhm.
is a
Mhm.
part of that. So,
And really, sorry, when we talk about,
no, no,
back to the beginning of our vision of a learner, that goes into what we're saying too. And, you had said, how do we, really get almost buy-in from the people who are doing the work, which in our mind is our educators and our parents.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
so when we created those objectives under our priorities, it was our staff who said, this is what would make a difference. This is what we need to do.
yeah,
This is the important thing, because our kids, focusing on who they are, building that relationship and making sure they're well, then leads to us being able to create critical thinkers
That's
and
right.
inspire that thinking. And so
That's right.
we really, again, that's why I'm really proud of the work that we're doing around that, because we're really acknowledging that all of those things are as important as the learning, because the learning doesn't happen unless they're there.
But that is the learning too, though, right?
And
Like
that is the learning as well.
that is the
Sure.
learning.
Yeah,
So
no,
so
your
it doesn't
curriculum
maybe
that.
fit in a traditional subject matter box, but it's. I mean, I think
That's right.
your plan, and then I think what your plan is doing is basically saying, no, this is a big a deal as anything else. So we're gonna emphasize that. And I think we're in a time where that's somewhat new. We've always known relationships important, so it's not like we didn't know that,
Right.
50 years ago. We just didn't. I always say too, like there was this sort of unwritten agreement between parents and home. Like you look after the relational, social stuff. That's your job. We'll do the academic stuff, and we had that sort of. That was sort of the agreement we had, and because of many, many reasons, one of being we can't just abdicate that to somebody else, because if they
Mhm.
don't have that and they come into school, then the learning is just not going to happen.
Sure.
But anyway, now that we've
Yeah.
acknowledged we have to do it, getting it on paper and now figuring out what that looks
Mhm.
like is a big part of the job.
Right. And we understand better what that means
Right.
and where
Right.
that goes.
Yeah.
And our data story has to look different, which is what I kind of touched on a little bit. Looking
Mm-hmm.
at evidence of learning and evidence of a successful learner, and how are our students growing and stretching, doesn't just come down to a number on a page, right? Or
That's right.
a
Yeah.
proficiency. And I think that's been a real change in how we're looking at building relationship as well.
And there's still a little bit of, I don't want to say distrust, but also just a legacy with both probably educators and parents to saying, like, we understand that learning is measured in grades and numbers, and
Mhm.
now you're telling me this other thing, and you say this, but like, what does that actually mean?
Mhm.
And so there's still some work in terms of both educating our all stakeholders, but also showing them, no, this is, and again, some of the things that you've said are kind of getting
Mhm.
there, but there's
Mhm.
still a ways to go, right? Because not
Sure.
everybody's quite with you yet with that.
Yeah.
That's what school is for, right?
And we are living that in the full right now as we move to the BC curriculum. And we're moving from grade based assessment
Right.
to proficiency scale and competency. And there's an unlearning to a relearn for all of
Right.
us, including our parents and
Absolutely.
our students, as well
That's
as our
right. And
staff. Obviously, that's who we're
and
working
you're
with.
just at and you're just at the beginning of that journey too.
We're just at the beginning.
So, well, as I said before we started recording, you're a bit of a guinea pig for me in that I'm using a new platform to record that I hope all works out well. But also, I want to start a new segment in this series, and you're the first person to answer this one.
Okay.
But I want you to tell me who you are grateful for in education. And as I told you ahead of time, you can't pick like your mom and dad or something like that. It has to be somebody who would potentially listen to the podcast and hear their name being spoken. So it doesn't have to necessarily be in your district. It could be, but somebody in education that you are grateful for. So Simone, who are you grateful for?
Well, there's so many people I'm grateful for. So it was a hard one, Dean, but I'm going to say right now, Chris Smeaton, who, since I moved into my role as superintendent, really has been a mentor and a touch point, and someone who I admire as an education leader and what he's done for education and continues to do as a retired superintendent. So he's had a real significant impact for me as a leader in education, especially over the last 5 or 6 years. So I will say Chris.
Well, I mean, and Chris is somebody that I know, and I've had,
Okay.
had
Yeah.
lots of opportunity to connect with Chris. We both share a love of golf, but also
Okay.
I
Yeah.
too, like you say, I don't think I know Chris maybe to the same degree that you have, but again, I appreciate his unwavering commitment to learning it. And I remember specifically with Chris having a conversation when the government of Alberta was it was a change in government, and they were going sort of, for lack of a better, a back to the basic kind of movement. And, Alberta had been for years really very innovative and kind of looking at technology in those kind of
Mhm.
powerful ways. And this was a potential step backwards. And I remember Chris saying that, he was very clear to his staff and to his principals that, listen, this isn't going to affect, we're continuing on a
Mhm.
path. We have a path, and I got your back, and I will look after all of that kind of whatever is in the background of that. Don't worry about it. We're on the right. And I admired him for that kind of a
Yeah.
stance and
Mhm.
advocacy for what he knew was right for kids. And
Right.
so again, and I think Chris in his
Mhm.
new role supporting people, I think, is still continue to do that. So thank you for that one.
Yeah.
And the last question I'm going to ask you is, you talked about, Yellowknife as well as anybody, being there as long as you have. But other than coming up to see the Northern Lights or some of the sort of more traditional things that people want to come do, what give us a lesser known place or an activity that we should check out when we
Mhm.
come visit you?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm gonna say Back Bay ice caves, and it's you can only go to them in the winter, of course, because they're ice caves. But there is a little Back Bay cemetery when you first go in, and you know it's very moving to see that as you go by, and then you walk a trail, and they have these amazing. It's the water that's melted and run off the rocks coming down.
Right.
And it's not a traditional cave as you would think cave you walk in and walk through, but you can kind of go underneath and see, and there's something to see. And not everybody knows about them. People in Yellowknife know, but they aren't
Right.
really promoted as a place to go for tourists. They're getting more and
Right.
more known, but if you come to Yellowknife in the winter, you should go to the Back Bay
Back
ice
Bay
caves to see them.
ice caves. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Simone. I appreciate so much your time. I appreciate the work you're doing in Yellowknife Catholic. As I said, I really admire the work you've done around your priorities and vision of a learner. I think others need to be paying attention to it, and I highly recommend them to check that out. So thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Dean.